Good morning and welcome to the Finance Committee, January 19th. We apologize for any delay and appreciate your patience. With that, we're going to go ahead and jump into the agenda. As you know, we've had some technical difficulties and some of our team members are having difficulty logging in, but we're going to go through the agenda item, and if there's questions, we may have to circle back around. So with that, item 1.01, ratifying contracts of $15,000 and less. Board Member Hedrick or Campbell, were there any questions specifically on that item? No. Okay. With that, we're going to go ahead and move on to item 1.02. We're going to turn it over to Dr. Kevin Whaley to speak to Converge 1.
Good morning, everybody. Again, this is another network equipment request for the middle schools. These are high capacity spaces such as gyms, cafeterias, anywhere you're going to put large numbers of kids or staff at the same time accessing the Wi-Fi. So this is thinking way ahead. Again, we're still pretty much stuck in the middle of equipment delays and shipping delays and timelines, things like that. So the request is just for the equipment at this time. Licensing will come later once the equipment is delivered and actually installed and put into use. Any questions?
For Dr. Whaley? All right. With that, we're going to move on to item 1.03, digital scoreboards. And this is for Lee Summit Elementary. And really the PTA at Lee Summit Elementary is purchasing a digital marquee for the school. As you can see there, you'll see the bid tabulation at the end of the agenda item. And really one of the reasons for the selection of this digital scoreboards was really the quality of the warranty and extended over time, as well as the fact that there was no cost for installation. So both of those were taken into consideration. Any questions on this particular agenda item? Okay, not hearing any. We're going to move on to item 1.04. This is Midwest bus sales. And again, Bruce Maples was not able to join us on this call. So really the transportation department is recommending the purchase of additional cameras through Seon for the amount of $85,000. We felt like this was a great use of the supplemental grant. It not only provides an additional measure of safety and security on buses, but it also allows us to use that grant money for COVID-related expenses as far as contact tracing. So again, we felt like this was a good use of those grant dollars. Any questions regarding the bus cameras?
Dr. Miller, I don't have a question on 1.04, but if I could have a quick go back to 1.03.
Yes.
I did notice that the funds for this were coming from the Lee Summit Elementary PTA.
Yes, that is correct.
And so really we're just approving this, reviewing this and approving this from a vendor standpoint.
Correct, that we followed the process. Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to express thanks to this PTA for raising those funds and providing this. I thought that was awesome. So thanks.
Yeah.
So have a go back on that.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, with that, we're going to move on to item 1.05. And this is a cooperative agreement with DTLS Apartments. And as you know, this is part of the Blue Parkway realignment agreement, which is the next agenda item. So this was part of the negotiated agreement between the city and the school district. And again, what this would allow us to do is it would allow us to take, we would own the parking lot that's on Douglas, and that would allow us to own the entire block where Lee Summit Elementary is. And really, when you look at it long-term, there's real benefit. It would allow us to look at the whole site development for Lee Summit Elementary. We know there's parking constraints, traffic flow constraints, and this would allow us to re-envision at a later date. So excited about this possibility and happy to answer any questions.
I know that we had legal review these. We had discussed these earlier.
Yes.
And these have been fully vetted through legal.
Yes.
The two items. And I just wanted to check, these are like the final agreements that have been completely reviewed.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. And then on this, and if you want me to hold this question until we go to the next item.
Whatever your preference.
Okay, thank you. Has the city approved the agreements as well, or does that come after our approval?
Yeah, that's a good question. I believe this has gone, the first stage has gone, well, this is going to require multiple agreements with the city over time. So the first batch of agreements have gone through the city and their approval process.
Okay.
Why we followed suit.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. And really then going on to item 1.06, and really that's that low overall agreement. And, I have to give the city a lot of credit. This has been a multi-year project between collaboration with the school district, Missouri Highway Patrol, MoDOT, and really taking a look at that Blue Parkway realignment. We know that first and foremost, this is a safety issue, right? Where that exchange at 291 and Blue Parkway. And so from a district perspective, we know this is in the best interest of our staff and students to make sure that that pathway into the school campus is safer. But there's also benefits. We know there's some cost. We know that there's going to be expenses associated with renovating parking, approximately $900,000. And again, we have to be mindful of cost escalation. But, the school district's also going to benefit from, the acquisition of the northern parcel, remnant parcel of Missouri Highway Patrol. And we also get the downtown parking lot. So there's and the turn lane into Stadium Drive. So again, the school district will benefit in a number of ways. And again, the overall issue at hand is really improving safety. Happy to answer any questions you have at this time. All right, no questions. All right, with that, we're going to move on to finance.
Good morning, everyone. We have a pretty hearty finance agenda this morning, so we'll jump right into our first item, and that's to approve what is almost a monthly recommendation to transfer from our general fund to the special revenue fund to make sure that we cover those expenses for the month of December. And so that recommendation is to approve the transfer of $3,406,909.69 from the general fund to the special revenue fund for December. In our next item, we'll look at the revenue and expense report for December. And just a couple of items to highlight there. And some of this dovetails nicely into our budget amendment that we'll be talking about here in a few minutes. But just wanted to point out that if we look at our revenue first, again, we are halfway through our fiscal year at the end of December 31st. So each month now, as we work towards June, the picture becomes a little bit clearer as to how we will end up our fiscal year. And so from a budgeting standpoint, it's always nice to hit those benchmarks. And really December is definitely, I think, the first major benchmark in the way to ending our fiscal year. So if you look at our revenue, slightly above from a percentage standpoint in Fund 1 and Fund 2, our operating as it compares to FY21. You will note the actual revenue totals in our debt service fund and our bond fund increased tremendously in December. And that is because of the closing of our bond issue, which also included the refunding and the refinancing to get a better interest rate and save on interest costs of our 2014 and 2015 issues. And so the refunding is why you see the large increase in both the revenue and expenditure column for the debt service fund. And then the revenue side with the bond fund, that reflects the bond funds that were received on December 2nd. And then also that includes the interest year to date. So there's 6 months of interest on the existing bond that we have received revenue on, and as well as the over $59.1 million that was new money coming in December. Capital projects funds, and I should mention operating and capital projects and debt service also reflect the first larger chunk of local tax revenue that we've received in this fiscal year. And so if you go back and look at November, you'll see a large change from November to December that will become even more pronounced in January as most of those local tax collections come in, and then kind of wraps up in February, and then March, April, May, and June is more, it will be a slower amount. But by the end of February, most of our local tax revenue will be in. Moving down, let's move down to the expense column and just looking at that again. If you do a fiscal year comparison in our operating and special revenue funds, which are as close as you can get to an apples to apples comparison at this point in the year, you'll notice that percentage wise, we are slightly below, which in the expenditures is a good thing, where we were at this point last year. You will notice that our debt service fund, again, that there you can see the larger expense, and that has to do with the refunding that was completed in December. And then moving across, you can see just the progression in our nutrition services fund, our activity, the Lee Summit Foundation, as well as BASS. And then if we move down to the bottom right, I'll talk more about those restricted funds. I do want to note something that is important here with our nutrition services fund. You'll notice a negative balance there, but do not be alarmed. The negative $468,000. The reason for that is our December payment, which was just over $1 million, $1,058,000. We did not receive that until January 5th. DESE was a little bit behind in getting those payments out to schools. That was not a Lee Summit thing. That was a statewide issue where the payments were actually not received in January. And so because we did not receive that until January 5th, we have to book that revenue in January. So if we would have received that in December, as we normally do, the food service balance would actually have been over $500,000 in the positive. So that's a good thing. Moving on to activity as well, you can see very consistent, actually, as you look at fund balance from a fund balance perspective, as it compares to last year. And that will, of course, vary a little bit throughout the year. And then BASS, still in the negative. However, it is slightly improved in the end of November. It was just under just over 1.975 million. Now it's 1.947. But also a very important item to mention there that we're extremely excited about. We found out shortly after the new year started that we were eligible and are expected to receive a paycheck protection grant because we kept our BASS services open to the community and our parents from January 1st to June 30th. $900,000 is what the district was eligible for, and we are slated to receive that. So we're very excited about that. That will definitely help our before and after school services balance. So that combined with what we anticipate to be hopefully the continued improvement in that fund will go a long way towards those fund balances as we end up our fiscal year. Current fund balance, FY22 on the bottom lower left page, you can see as it relates to last year, it is an improvement. That is a little bit relative because, some of that does depend on when tax revenue is received. And so as we get into March and April, that'll be a little bit more of an apples to apples comparison. But still overall, a very, very healthy picture there. Any questions on this report? All right, moving on to the investment report. I do want to highlight there at the top before we move down, we do have two large treasuries that are coming due at the end of this month. Unfortunately, those are at good interest rate yields. The market is not where it was in October of 2019 when both of those treasuries were purchased. So we will be looking to reinvest that $5 million, but we will be looking at the term there, and it unfortunately will not be, as we know, not as good of an interest rate as we had previously. Moving down to the bottom, I would like to highlight that is not part of this report, but we did recently in January, and you'll see that reflected at our meeting next month. We invested just over $33 million in some term investments. We had $10 million that was invested at 0.13% that expires in April, $8 million that expires in May that earned a 0.16%, and then $15 million that matures in June, and it has a 0.23% interest rate. And so we're continuing to look at that, and I would anticipate there will be more news to report, and that will be reflected on this investment report at our February meeting. This is the time where, obviously we have a lot of local tax revenue, and then we also have the bond funds that we are looking to invest. All of that should happen, or at least I would say 90% of it will happen by January 31st. So there will be a lot of new information that you'll see coming up in February. The other item just to look at there, total current year total investment funds. And again, this can vary based on the local tax collection rate, but you do see an improvement December 31st, 2021 as compared to last year at this time. One last thing that I'd like to mention on the investment report. Next month, you will see, we've been working on this in the background, and next month, I'm sorry, you'll see a little different look to this report. The same core information will be there, but we're actually going to provide a little bit more detailed information as it relates to these investments. And I think hopefully you'll find that beneficial. So look for that coming up in February. Any questions on the investment report? All right, last item here is the balance sheet. Just like to highlight at the bottom our general operating fund. The $88,014,000 is reflective of our total liabilities and fund balance. And as you can see, the difference between that and what was reflected on the last sheet for our operating fund was just the liabilities for that we have outstanding, which are just under $18,000. Debt service fund, again, that's reflective of the refunding amount. And then we also, the $9 million that was prepaid in December as part of that refunding. In March, we will have the much larger bulk of that debt service fund that will come out. But again, we'll be continuing to receive significant revenues in there, at least we have for the first part of January and really for the next 30 days due to our local tax collection. Capital projects, our fund balance just under $5 million. Again, with the nickel that we have in there, we will receive a little bit more revenue, and then we'll also receive some of our M&M revenue that will come in February, and that will significantly help the capital projects fund. Bond fund is reflective of the money that was infused with the last part of our issue. And then you can see the balances there. Just remember that nutrition services, again, once that money is reflected in January, and so in essence, we should receive 2 payments from the state in January. Next month, that number will look quite a bit different and should be in the positive. Any questions on the balance sheet? Okay. All right, the next item. We have our first budget amendment for FY22. And so I'll go through this and at a high level, and of course would welcome any questions at the end of it. And I'll try to touch on what I feel like are the major points as part of this amendment. So from the 10,000 foot level, basically a budget that's approved in June is really, keep in mind that's before the end of the fiscal year. And so we're just using revenue there that is what we're projecting it to be, but also expenses. You're also projecting those for how you will end the fiscal year. And so since that budget was approved in June, we have had our update to our assessed valuation. We had our final certification that came in September. We approved our tax rates, which were different than what was estimated in June. We had updated information from the state of Missouri, summer school ADA, which was a significant factor for us. The ESSER revenue, but as probably more important than the revenue, which we pretty much knew in June, was the expense side of that, how we will expense that in FY22. The bond sale, which was significant. And so all of that impacts our budget. So if we go to, Hannah, if you could put on this, can you open the slideshow? Is that possible? Yeah. So we'll just go through this quickly and then hit some of the actual highlights of the budget amendment. If you look at our revenue budget, some of the items that have changed there from June. The assessed value, we have that final increase. It was at 8.6%. So that value is reflected in these final budget figures. And again, that mainly impacts Fund 1 to general revenue, Fund 3 debt service, as well as our slight amount on capital projects. I would like to note, and this is an important notation, that on our Prop C revenue, that is still budgeted at $1,047 per ADA. We are optimistic that that number could be higher than that. I think 1,075 is safe, but we're actually hearing that number could be over $1,100, maybe even over $1,200, which when you're talking about ADA that is over 17,000, a difference of $100 is a significant amount of money for our school district. And so, but I think it's important to be somewhat conservative, especially in January still. And so we have left that budget number the same. There is substantial revenue adjustment in debt service and bond funds, and that is simply because of the refunding, again, that I highlighted earlier, as well as that infusion of bond funds that was not reflected yet in the budget that was approved in June. And so that does have a significant impact on our local revenue as well as our local expenditures. But just keep in mind, when you look at that total revenue budget and how much that has increased, as well as the expenditure side, the large majority of this budget amendment, that is simply due to the revenue adjustments in debt service, as well as our bond funds. Basic formula, we are confident, about as confident as you can be in January, that will be the remain at 6375, which is a positive. And then federal revenue, the one thing I would say there, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in a couple minutes. Special education and title funding is a significant source of our federal funding, but as well as food service reimbursement, which actually comes through DESE, but that is a federal program, and so it's listed as federal revenue. And as we've talked about before, because all meals are reimbursed this year at the free lunch rate, which is a higher rate than normally you would charge for somebody that is paying full price for breakfast or lunch, that impacts in a positive way your revenue from food service, which comes through as a federal revenue. And so that is reflected in this budget amendment. Also, the COVID, obviously, relief that we've received, that is reflected. And so when you look at that $6 million, that is primarily ESSER2 money, which is $4.5 million. ESSER3, which we anticipate to request about $1.3 million of that this year, and then as well as the transportation funds, which was just under $250,000 that we did request, and we actually have already received that this year. Okay, moving on to the next slide, expenditures. The top half of that is really just a recap. This is not changed. This was part of the phase 1 salary improvements and related benefits. So you see those respective percentages and the approximate dollar amount that was reflected by that approval last June. What did change, and we updated on the benefit side, which was good news, as it relates to this fiscal year and then moving on, is that our health insurance contributions remained at the same level for January through June of this year. So we know that there's not an increase there. And at least the first half of FY23, we know that those will remain the same. Retirement contributions, I'll just highlight there. We have received word already that in 22-23, those will also remain unchanged. So that's a positive. There was some times there in the early 2010 through 2014 where we saw some movement in that had an impact, and especially on a district our size, that can be significant. And then the last item there is something that is new, and I'd like to highlight that for now, this is a budget, and we are budgeting a transfer from our general funds to our capital improvement fund that would help keep that fund at the same level that we began the school year, which I think it has been dropping over the last 2 to 3 years. And so I think that would be a positive if we were able to do that. All right, moving on to the next slide. You see just a graphic representation there. What I would mention there is please remember that in particular this year, bond projects, as well as a little bit on the general obligation debt because of the refunding that we did and the additional prepay, those percentages are higher than they would normally be. And our bond project percentage is probably this year the highest that it will be as compared to last year and next year, just because total dollars that we'll be able to spend, from July 1 to June 30, we have been in the heart of our construction and renovation phase. And so that percentage is skewed a little bit as a result. But that is a representation there of the FY22 budget and where the money is being spent. Okay, next slide. This is what you see here is the budget that was approved in June. And the amounts at the top, again, were estimates because you don't have true numbers there. And so you're estimating where you will end up. And then expenditures, obviously, is also, as with any budget year, you're inputting all the information that you have and outlining that in your expenditure totals. So you'll notice there, in particular at the bottom, the ending balance, what it was projected at, and that it's 31.54%. I would highlight there, though, that the capital projects ending balance was projected to be just under 1.4 million at the end of this fiscal year. And so you'll notice a substantial change there as well. You'll also notice some positive movement in restricted as we get to the next slide. So if we could go on to the next slide. The proposed amendment for our meeting tomorrow night. I will highlight the beginning balances at the top are accurate reflections of our audit as well as our ending fund balances in our ASBR, which match. And so that's why you see the adjustment there. And those are real numbers for the beginning balance for this fiscal year for our school district. Looking at revenue total, the amount in incidental and the operating and the teachers fund for revenue really did not change much at all. It a little bit to the positive, but 227.7 million basically to 228.3 million is a slight adjustment there of less than $1 million. The general fund came up a little bit, and that is primarily because of the new, what we know that our tax rate was and our final assessed value. Teachers' revenue came down slightly, and if you'll notice the federal difference there, that's primarily due to ESSER funds that we know that are still out there, but we will not be requesting in FY22. And so that's the large part of that adjustment. But overall, positive. Capital projects, again, a more positive number to start the year, and a current revenue total that's adjusted slightly because of the final AV and tax rate. And then moving across, you notice that the bond fund obviously increases significantly, and that is due to, again, the money to finish what was approved in 2020, the issuance of those new bonds that is reflected in this budget amendment, as well as debt service, which a large part of that is money in, money out, but we still need to reflect that, and we'll be expected to reflect that on our audit in the ASBR at the end of the year. So moving down to really the most important pieces, if you look at the bottom in our ending fund balance, you can see there that overall dollar amount is slightly lower at $72,773,000, but we would still be above the 30% mark. So still a healthy fund balance. Capital projects improved significantly. Again, basically the same money that we had to start the year, we would be able to finish the year with that amount. Debt service, you'll notice that number almost remains unchanged. And that was, part of the refunding process and the analysis that we did on what we could afford. So a healthy debt service balance, and certainly enough to cover the cost of our bonds. And then the improvement in restricted, and that is primarily due to, if you go up to the top under revenue, you would notice that our federal revenue under restricted improved from 6.256 million on the previous slide to 9.5 million. That is almost exclusive. Well, it is exclusively due to what we anticipate receiving from our food service reimbursement. It is a significant amount. Obviously, it's a positive thing for the district. And I think an important piece of that too that I should highlight is part of that is what allows us then to make the transfer from the general fund to the capital projects fund. And certainly some of that then, as we know in food service, as we look down the road, there's some capital needs there that we have, in the kitchens that we have, almost 30 kitchens throughout the district. There are always things that come up that need to be replaced, and this will help us get on a really nice replacement schedule, not only for next year, but I think moving down the road. And then the bond funds, when you look at expenditures, obviously that's a best guess. That could be reflected and changed, obviously, in May and in June. But that is where we would anticipate ending the year is around 80 million. Depending on delays, that could be a little bit higher, but that all just depends on what we're able to get accomplished by June 30th. All right, I think that's it. Are there any questions on the budget amendment? Okay. Our last item is the tuition rates for 2022-23. And as you look at these, you do notice a significant difference in what was approved for 21-22 and what is recommended for 22-23. And as I tried to highlight, there's really two main reasons for that. One is that the amount of money that was spent that you used for this calculation was higher in the 2021 school year, which is the year that you use for this projection. as it related to 1920. Remember, in March of 2020, schools basically shut down. And so obviously from an expense standpoint, even though salaries, were kept consistent, all the other general expenses that you would have basically came to a standstill, as well as all the extra items, all the trips, all those things that you normally do in a spring semester came to a standstill. So even though 2021 school year was different in terms of, hybrid learning models and all of those operating expenses, still the majority of them came back. And so you had a higher expense rate in 2021 than you did in 2020. But that's a small piece of this. The much larger piece is part of the calculation. What the state wants you to use is the ADA number that you receive. And actually, the calculation that was used for 1920 used an enrollment number, which was over 18,000. Our ADA number last year was actually less than 16,000. It's closer to 15,800. So that's a significant difference. And so what you're using for the ADA that gets divided into those expenses, obviously that creates a higher ratio. And so that is the primary driver between that increase. Now, big picture, we had no tuition paying students last year. We have none this year. You never know what the future holds, but I don't know that we would have any in 22, 23. So big picture, the impact was nil, but that will be at a higher rate. The one other item that I did do as part of this grade level grouping that's used to calculate this, some of those expenses that are very specific to high schools. For instance, the tuition that we pay to Herndon to send our high school students there, I place that in the 9-12 category because that is exclusively a high school expenditure. And so I think that's the most accurate placement for that. But obviously that has an impact, a small impact, but it does in the amount of money that's reflected for a 9-12 expenditure as opposed to an elementary expenditure. The last thing that I would highlight here is for this year, and actually it will flow into next year, because our grade level groupings are changing. And so the next year it's a 6-8 middle school. When we do this calculation next year, it's still on 21-22 data, which was a 7-8 middle school. And so we may have the ability to slightly tweak that. We could consider looking at building by building expenditures, although that's a much more intensive process for a district our size. But that is a consideration for next year. But the decision was made to use, obviously high school, it doesn't change, but elementary and middle school it does. And so that's just a consideration that we have going forward. Any questions on the calculation of the tuition rates? Okay. Thank you, everyone. And sorry, I know that was very long. I appreciate your time.
All right, appreciate it, Nathan. All right, with that, we're going to move on to section 3 facilities. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kyle to go through a number of topics. Kyle, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, my click didn't work. I think I'm unmuted now. Thank you and good morning. Okay, I've got a large number of items, so I'll just start rolling through these. Please ask any questions if you have them. The first item is a contract for consulting services for roofing. District currently has a contract with Benchmark to provide inspection and consulting to manage our long-range roofing program. And the next 2 schools that are up for roof replacements are Hazel Grove and Lee Summit West. A large portion of Lee Summit West, when it was built, I guess it's been almost 18 years ago now, has a single ply roof on it that does have a fairly short life cycle. It is at end of life, and we've had numerous failures over the last year or two. And so we need to start the process of re-roofing west. It will not all happen in 1 year. So this is a very large amount of roofing that we're going to go ahead and design. It is about 113,000 square feet of roof at West, about 30,000 square feet at Hazel Grove. Due to the market right now, we are honestly not sure exactly when this work is going to be able to occur. It will definitely not happen this summer. We're going to go ahead and get it designed, talk with our consultants and contractors that we work with, and talk through the best time to both bid it and do the work. The supply chain for roofing right now is still an extremely long lead item, as long as 1 year to get certain components of roofing systems. So we're just trying to get all this stuff designed, and we'll work on the total bid schedule as we figure that out. All said and done, this work is probably going to run around $4 million would be the total investment of these two roofs. Although roof pricing is just like the delivery issues, pricing is all over the map right now too. So are there any questions I can answer on this item? Thank you. I'll move on to item 3.02. This is a contract being proposed for Branch Pattern, who is a mechanical, electrical, plumbing, engineering company. This contract is for HVAC commissioning. This has been our standard practice for at least the last couple of decades. Commissioning is a process where you come in at the end of the project, you bring a third-party consultant in to functionally performance test the HVAC systems. Primary reasons are to, as we know today, guarantee that the designed indoor air quality standards are met, also to maintain energy requirements, and then just the basic functions of the system. Due to the complexity of the systems, this has become a very important part of the process, as many things can be kind of buried and hidden within systems and go undiagnosed as you operate the building. So we did submit an RFP and evaluated that and chose Branch Pattern based on their experience and the other work that they provided. Can I answer any questions on this item? Thank you. The next item, number 3.03, is related to replacing all of the rooftop and what we call a split system, a standard, individual mechanical unit at Hazel Grove Elementary. The systems there are at end of life. And we used a kind of a new process for us now. We have used cooperative purchasing quite a bit, but we just to try to look at our pricing and make sure that we were getting the best cost for the district. We actually worked through 3 different companies that had like equipment that served the same performance criteria that we have, and got cooperative purchasing pricing from all 3 of them. And you'll see the bid tabulation that has been provided. So you'll see that Carrier has come in with the low price. They are kind of new back into the market. As you guys know, Carrier has been one of the longest names in the HVAC industry. Wells Carrier actually invented modern air conditioning back in the early 20th century. But they, for some reason, just from marketing and presence, have kind of fallen out of the K-12 market a little bit. And Dr. Miller and I had met with some of their folks, and they expressed interest in kind of pushing the K-12 market a little more. And so I do believe that some of this number is got a little bit of marketing built into it. But we do feel really good that they aggressively went after this project. And we are are comfortable with their equipment, and I'm excited to give them a new start on this project. This equipment will all meet our indoor air quality standards. It will meet fresh air and ventilation requirements and also provide humidity control that is important in today's world. So are there any questions I can answer on this item? Thank you. The next item 3.04 is related to the chillers at Lee Summit West. And these chillers are about halfway through their life cycle. Just to kind of give you a picture, these are two very large chillers that handle the cooling load for the entire original building. So these two pieces of equipment cool over 300,000 square feet of space and handle a very important function to that building. We have begun to see some failure in the components. They run almost every day of the year. We do cool the internal parts of the school even through most of the winter. So we're at a point in their life where the compressors of these chillers are essentially very large engines. And so they really need to be pulled out, stripped down, rebuilt, and then put back together. The chillers themselves are from Daikin. And so we approached Daikin about performing this work because it is their equipment. They're best suited to do the work for us. So this is a large cost, but this is a very important piece of infrastructure that we feel like we need to stay on top of the maintenance on. So and both of these items, I should say, we will be charging them to the district's HVAC capital budget with then ESSER3 funding as that is available and can be applied, that can be transferred and used to take care of these expenses as we've discussed. Can I answer any questions on this item? Okay, the next three items I'm going to talk about are design contracts for the additional work that has been discussed in the bond issue. And the final item, I'll talk through some budgets for those specific projects, but specifically just talking through the design. The first item is a contract with Gould Evans to perform some building improvements that would support both the construction and geometry curriculum and also the robotics classes or robotics program that is currently housed at Lee Summit High School. There has been a longstanding desire to not have the student travel and to have those programs centralized back on their home campuses. And this is a good opportunity with the needs of construction and geometry to create a building that can house both of those programs. So the plan is to build approximately a 7,000 square foot building at both Lee Summit West and Lee Summit North. Roughly half of the space will be for each one of those programs, both for build space, shop space, and instructional areas. And then at Lee Summit High School, we would perform some renovation, both for robotics and for the vacated robotics area to accommodate some other needs at Lee Summit High School. So this work it will definitely be done by the 23 school year. We have a little bit extra time in the design and construction window, which we feel like is going to be needed for supply chain issues that could come up. But at this point, we're planning to be ready for the 23 school year. Can I answer any questions on this item?
So I know that this question, and I don't know, Dr. Miller, this may be more for you, but this item, as well as 3.07, and I know some of the other updates that Kyle, you're going to speak to a little bit later. I know we've discussed additional bond projects and we've, over different meetings, we've kind of heard some updates and some thoughts around that. But I'm not sure that we've actually voted or approved those additional projects. And so I'm wondering if that is a piece of Thursday night's meeting, is to actually approve those projects as part of the approval then for design work and things like that.
Yeah, so really, the architectural, that's a very good question. I appreciate that. You're right. In October, we talked about what those big additional projects would be. And really the board would be approving based upon, what's being presented, and Kyle discussed with the architectural agreements on really moving forward. Is there something different or that you think that would be helpful, Board Member Campbell? Because I've not heard concerns with the proposed projects that were presented. And so what we've tried to do in the board submittal for the bond budget update is provide more refined numbers for those projects that we brought forward in October.
Mm-hmm. Which is great. And I appreciate the additional dollars and cents around this, because that's important. I guess I'm just wondering, and I am supportive of these projects, definitely, but I'm just wondering if we need to work with board leadership and actually have a vote to approve these projects ahead of approving these
contracts,
the financial pieces of them, right?
Okay, I'm happy to, I'll have a discussion with Dr. Buck following this meeting and talk through process.
That sounds great. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Just kind of to follow up along that, I think the thing would be for the board to have a clear picture of the projects and even have some discussion around the projects that have priority or that the board would approve. And I think to give more guidance really and direction. And I just think it's a big enough expenditure that the board needs to have those discussions so that we have input and consensus on what those projects are.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Point taken. All right, I will visit with Dr. Buck since both of these are coming forward tomorrow night on how to best proceed for tomorrow night.
Okay, I will continue on with these next two items. The next contract is with HOLLISON Miller to provide, you'll see it says additional services for the Early Education Center. The board previously approved a contract in August for lower level renovation to that facility. As our design team met, and we talked about district needs for early education. We expanded the renovation area in that building to better suit the long-term needs. Currently, we have 8 early education classrooms in the district out in other satellite locations. This increased area at the Paradise Park facility will provide 13 early education rooms, 2 of those being for Head Start. So this does give us some expansion, and we feel like we'll serve our needs for some time. In some of the additional work that was discussed with our design team is related to the additional program opportunities related to renovating the fire station and other outdoor amenities that are being developed by our curriculum and instruction team. So these are some really exciting outdoor biology and ecology opportunities for kids. The fire station is expected to be used as an outdoor learning classroom, animal science, biology type space where we'd have some really great peer high school, elementary students teaching with our district teachers going on. and doing field trip type activities with outdoor learning. So there's a number of amenities that could be added that we're working through. Restroom facilities, other types of outdoor learning activities related to the water areas and different ecological curriculum areas. So it's really going to be an exciting project, and kind of credit Dr. Buck and his background and natural sciences for, really promoting this idea for kids in the district. Are there any questions I can answer on this item? Okay, thank you. The next item is a design contract with HOLLISON Miller for some much needed improvements to the Miller Park campus. And as you may or may not know, there are three primary, don't want to minimize, there's a lot of things going on the Miller Park campus, but there are three kind of primary educational programs happening there. There is, and I'm not going to get into all the acronyms, they're kind of out on the board item, but there's the RISE program that is kind of that, what we think of as Miller Park. The kids that have come from other buildings that are, have some behavioral things going on, and they're working on getting back into their home school. We have the flight program that is currently located in the one-story building that sits just on the south side of the campus. The flight program serve kids that many of them have medical needs, but they have behaviors that are not safe to be in other buildings. The flight program has grown quite a bit recently over the last few years. They have outgrown their space, and they're actually currently using some mobile classroom space to allow the safety requirements and staffing that are needed to manage those kids. Then the third program on campus is the GREAT program, and those are the 18 to 21-year-old learners learning life skills, transitioning into their professional lives after school. So what this project proposes is building a new small building to house the flight program to meet their needs, to renovate the existing space that flight is in, very minor renovation for kind of that life skills, work environment, activity space that the GREAT program needs. And then also create a small addition on the south side of the Miller Park building that will house a new front office, give that building a sense of entry. But the primary reason for that addition is to meet the ADA needs of that building that we've not had since its opening. We need an elevator, we need ADA compliant fire exits, the stairs from the second floor. And so that'll all be housed there on that south side of the building, and we'll free up one other classroom space inside for the RISE program too. So that's my quick summary. I'll be glad to answer any questions if you guys have them. All right, thank you. We'll move on to the final item, the bond budget update report. And I appreciate your patience as we work through the logistics and technology of getting, the funds from the recent bond sale into the right place, and then the reports showing up and everything in there. So in lieu of the other bond report, which is also attached, we've included a summary here of the proposed additional projects and the funding that is anticipated for the current projects for the total bond proceeds. So you'll see at the bottom that we're expecting total bond expenses to be $260 million. So that is the additional premium bond sale, the bond interest, the total resources that are available. So just kind of walking through the changes, the early education center line, you'll notice the increased construction cost for the main building and also for the exterior site amenities that we discussed. This does include the purchase price of the property also. And then moving down, you'll notice in the other projects, there are budgets listed for the Miller Park and the construction and geometry projects. And these are the hard and soft cost numbers that are anticipated for those projects. Also included there is a chunk of money, as we've discussed, the $9.9 million to support the capital improvements budget moving forward for the next couple of years for the district. Is there any questions I can answer about this budget item?
One of the things that I'd like to point out from the October meeting, when we originally presented some of the larger projects that we would be adding, we did remove the aerospace program. It's still a priority for the district, but in visiting with the city, we feel like timelines may be able to be adjusted. And Dr. Buck's on the call, so he may be able to add to that. Again, it's still a priority, but again, I think we have more flexibility with timeline. And potentially a 2025, include that in a 2025 bond. So just want to make you aware, bring that forward too. We think that what we wanted to do was give you an updated list of projects, what the proposed costs were. And what we hope to do is have it, based upon discussion and feedback today, we'll follow suit with updating the actual bond report that you see in front of you. Nathan, did you want to touch base on the process for updating that bond report so the board's aware?
Sure. Once these, we have a good idea of the figures, and so we're looking at a way to make sure that we can add these into our bond report so it can accurately reflect the budget amounts and then what we've spent. The challenge that we're facing, and we're currently wrestling B+, but we will get it figured out, is that report was created in FY21, and so we're crossing fiscal years, and so we just want to make sure that any changes that we make can be reflected across those fiscal years. And so once we figure that out, we will have that report, the bond update report that you see every month. We will get that updated, but that is a process that we're going through. Certainly, we hope to have that ready by next month, but we'll update accordingly if we run into any more problems there.
I wanted to add is that just please know that the district is also collaborating with other partners that may be able to bring other resources to the table. Again, that's not, and we don't have any kind of commitment. We're still exploring those possibilities, but just wanted to make you aware those numbers could adjust if we do have revenue from other resources. I didn't mean to cut you off, Board Member Campbell. My apologies.
No worries. I appreciate that additional note. And thank you, Nathan, for reviewing that, because that was one of my questions, was when I know that we've talked about somewhere it's in the arrears on some of the amounts. And so you're thinking maybe next month we would have these updates posted.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the goal would be to have these updates. Obviously some of these items are already in there, and the only thing that would change would be the budgeted amounts for a slight, and then the additional that's added in, because the original budget was set up for 224 million. Right. And so it's just a matter of changing those amounts. And in theory, it's a very easy thing to do, but in reality, in inputting the information, it can cause problems to our beginning balances, which it's in the software, it's on paper, but we want it to accurately reflect in B+ what the revenue projections are as well as the expenses. And so that's really the only thing that would cause a delay, is just making sure that we have that right.
Great. And I definitely, I think it would be beneficial to see the original, the update, right? And then we have that going forward so that we're not just changing what the original budget amount was. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. And then I did want to ask, and this is just so I understand, the 9.9 million for the capital improvements is not coming out of bond funds, even though appreciate, Kyle, that that's your world, right? Bond and capital improvements. But the 9.9 is actually coming from that transfer, Nathan, that you were discussing when we, no?
No, it's actually, that is bond funds.
Okay. I'm not sure I got that from there. Okay. So we'd be moving bond funds to overall capital projects.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay.
Well, and I think that's part of that conversation, Board Member Campbell, of, you know, the bond funds that weren't originally obligated and where should they, what kind of projects should that fund? And so I think that's part of that whole discussion, because I think if you scroll down, or whoever can scroll down to the bottom of this current page that's on there, excuse me, the 260 million would actually be the original bond dollars plus the what we sold at a premium as part of the total bond dollars available, if I'm understanding correctly. And so that's why those other projects are the ones that we referred back to just a few minutes ago about, in terms of the consensus from the board, that those are the projects that should be utilized, or, you know, moved forward with those bond resources. Hopefully I stated that correctly.
You did.
Thank you for those clarifications. I appreciate it.
Well, with that, I think that concludes our agenda. If there's any other questions, the takeaway that I have is really that I'll visit with Dr. Buck about what's the appropriate forum for us to have that discussion with the board on the projects. Okay. And I'll visit with him on that later today. Is there anything else that we can provide you today?
No, thank you, everyone. Appreciate all your work.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.